He didn't love me. He didn't even look at me when he said yes. To him, I was just a formality, a cold agreement sealed between two powerful families. But to me, that day marked the beginning of a silent war between my dignity and a heart that still believed in love. He married me without love. But he had no idea that, buried beneath my silence, was a fire strong enough to melt even the coldest man in the world. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as callous as he tried to be. Maybe his soul was just asleep, waiting for someone to wake it up. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this story from? Leave your country in the comments. I'd love to know where love stories like this reach. And if this kind of narrative touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. There's a new chapter of love and pain every week, and I want you here for all of it. He didn't even look at me when I walked down the aisle. Not once. Not when I entered the hall, drowning in white silk and shadows. Not when my father placed my trembling hand in his. Not even when the priest asked him to vow a forever he clearly didn't believe in. His jaw was made of stone. His eyes, colder than the winter wind slapping the windows of that cathedral. And I, a silent bride with a storm in her chest, stood beside a man who had buried his heart long before he ever met me. They called it a union. But it was nothing more than a transaction. A contract signed in silence between two powerful families desperate to preserve a crumbling legacy. His name was Adrian Wolfe, heir to an empire, protector of his mother's pride and prisoner of promises made long ago. Me. I was simply Aurora Blackwell, the obedient daughter. The girl who always said yes when her soul screamed no. He didn't want a wife. And I didn't want a stranger. But fate, cruel and unapologetic, had different plans. The ceremony was a blur. I remember the weight of the ring he placed on my finger. Not with love but with duty. I remember the kiss that never touched my lips. And the applause of people who knew nothing about the war happening behind my forced smile. Later, in the grand ballroom, Adrian stood across the crowd, speaking to men who toasted to his sacrifice, as if I were a burden he was brave enough to carry. I stood alone by the window watching the snow fall. Each flake was a quiet reminder of what love should feel like, soft, cold, fleeting. But I felt none of it. Not yet. That night we didn't share a bed. He gave me the guest room. No explanations. No pretense. Just silence. Loud, sharp, unbreakable. And yet, behind that silence, something stirred. A flicker. Pause. A heartbeat I wasn't supposed to hear. Because sometimes, the loudest emotions are the ones no one dares to say. He married me without love. But he didn't realize that even silence can burn if you listen closely enough. And I had spent my entire life listening. Before we continue, tell me something. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own life? Like you're just following a script someone else wrote for you? Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know whose hearts around the world are beating with this story. And if you're still here, maybe it's because some part of this story feels like yours. Subscribe and keep going. The next chapter may speak directly to your soul. The house was breathtaking. An architectural marvel of glass, stone, and silence. A mansion so beautiful it almost made you forget how cold it truly was. Adrian didn't speak during the drive. His hands on the steering wheel were firm, steady, emotionless. His profile was sculpted like one of those tragic heroes from ancient myths. Beautiful, untouchable, doomed. He opened the door for me not out of kindness but habit. And just like that I stepped into his world. No, our world. The inside of the mansion was even colder than the man who owned it. Dark hallways whispered old secrets. Paintings of stern ancestors glared down from the walls. And a grand staircase stretched out before me like the spine of some slumbering beast. Your room is on the left wing, he said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was deep, calm, and devoid of warmth. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask if I was tired. He didn't welcome me. He simply turned away and disappeared down a corridor swallowed by shadows. My room was stunning. All soft tones and expensive silence. There was a fireplace already burning, casting gold over cream-colored walls. The bed looked untouched, too perfect, like no one had ever dared to ruin its stillness. I sat on the edge, exhaling the tension I'd carried all day. The dress clung to my skin like a second burden. My veil was long gone, like my girlhood dreams. This wasn't a honeymoon. It was a hostage situation dressed in silk and diamonds. I walked over to the balcony and opened the tall windows. The cold night air rushed in, and for a moment I felt alive. Not happy. Not safe. Just alive. I could see his silhouette in the distance, standing in the garden talking on the phone. His posture, even from afar, radiated tension. Power. Isolation. I wondered if he ever felt alone. I wondered if the walls around him were built to protect him, or to punish him. Because I was beginning to understand something. Adrian Wolf wasn't heartless. He was haunted. The days that followed were a rhythm of silence. We passed each other in hallways. Shared occasional meals that tasted more of obligation than salt. He worked late. I read in the library, pretending not to notice when his eyes lingered for just 1 second too long. And still he said nothing. Until one morning I left a note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for the fireplace. I liked it." No signature. Just a crack in the ice. That night I found a book placed on my bed. A romance novel. One I'd once mentioned loving as a child. I smiled. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't an apology. But it was something. The first flicker. The first sign. He married me without love. But I had just seen his heart flicker behind the glass. Have you ever lived under the same roof with someone, and still felt like a ghost in your own story? Tell me in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you felt something stir in this chapter, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe and stay with me. We're just beginning to discover the man behind the silence. It was a Tuesday when the storm came, not outside but inside him. That morning the sky outside the mansion was bruised, heavy with rain. Inside the house was quiet like it always was. But something in the air had shifted. It clung to the curtains, curled around the corners of the walls, and echoed through every step I took down the stairs. Adrian wasn't in his usual place in the study. He was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, shirt slightly wrinkled, eyes dark and distant. He looked real. For the first time he wasn't a statue. He didn't speak right away. I watched him pour coffee into 2 cups, black, no sugar, and place one in front of the seat across from his. Was it for me? I didn't ask. I just sat. And for a few minutes we sipped our bitterness in silence. Then he said something unexpected. "You don't have to pretend here." I looked up, startled. His voice was lower than usual, softer but not less cold. Still it held something. Like a note from a forgotten song. "Pretend what?" I asked, careful not to show the flutter in my chest. "That you're fine. That this is normal. That I'm someone you wanted." I set the cup down. My hands trembled slightly. "Do you want me to lie?" I whispered. He looked at me, then really looked. For the first time since our wedding his eyes searched mine. And in them I didn't see arrogance. I saw pain. "No," he said. "I think we've both had enough lies for one lifetime." I wanted to ask what that meant. But something told me he wasn't ready to answer. And so we sat. 2 strangers bound by paper, sitting in a kitchen built for family, drinking coffee like it was an apology neither of us had the courage to say. But from that moment something between us shifted. That night the rain came. Thunder shook the walls. Wind howled through the hallways. And yet, I felt calm. I was reading in bed when the door creaked open. Adrian stood there, soaked from the storm, shirt clinging to his skin, hair dripping water onto the floor. His expression was unreadable, like a man caught between running and staying. "The library windows are leaking," he said. "I'm trying to stop the water." "Need help?" I asked. He paused. "Only if you want to." I followed him. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. We worked side by side, placing towels, adjusting frames, avoiding each other's eyes. But there was something strangely intimate in the silence. It was the first time I saw him flinch, not from pain but from memory. A photo on the shelf had fallen. A woman in black and white. Beautiful. Is it familiar? "Is that your mother?" I asked softly. He froze. "She used to read to me here," he said after a long pause. "Before everything changed." "Before what?" He didn't answer. But his jaw clenched. His hand trembled just enough to betray the storm within. And just like that, the library wasn't just full of books. It was full of ghosts. I looked at him and saw a man drowning in promises, punished by a past he never chose. And I knew then. Adrian Wolf wasn't cruel. He was wounded. And no one had ever dared to bandage his soul. He married me without love. But tonight I saw the scar behind the armor. And for the first time I didn't feel invisible. I felt chosen, not by chance, but by a crack in the silence that finally let me in. Have you ever seen someone's pain before they even said a single word? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes, pain is the truest language we speak. The next morning the rain had stopped. But the silence in the house remained, heavier now. Not cold, just cautious. Like a soul that had opened its door for a second, and then quietly closed it again. I didn't see Adrian at breakfast. The coffee pot was full but untouched. The seat across from mine was empty again. And the library door, the one we'd shared the night before, was closed. It was as if the night hadn't happened. As if the flicker of something real between us had been just a ghost of a dream. I spent the day walking through the garden behind the mansion. Bare branches stretched like arms toward the gray sky. The air was still and sharp, biting at my skin, but it made me feel alive. For the first time since our wedding, I wasn't trying to escape. I was trying to understand. Who was this man who buried himself in silence and surrounded himself with stone? Why did his hands tremble only when he spoke of his mother? And why, for a single moment, did I feel like he saw me? Back inside, I passed by his study. The door was ajar. Curiosity tugged at me, soft, persistent. Inside the room was dim. Stacks of books lined every wall. On his desk, scattered papers, notes, and in the center, a photograph. Not the same one I'd seen in the library. This one was newer. Adrian, younger, smiling, genuinely, beside a woman with wild dark hair and eyes that reminded me of myself. She looked like someone who once made him laugh. Who once made him feel. I didn't dare ask who she was. But a question buried itself in my chest. Was there someone else before me? Someone he couldn't forget? That night as I passed his door I paused. I didn't knock. I didn't want to disturb the careful distance he had rebuilt. But as I turned away I heard his voice. Can't sleep either? I turned back. He stood in the doorway, dressed in black, barefoot, eyes soft, too soft for the man I'd first met at the altar. I nodded. He stepped aside, not inviting, but not stopping me either. I entered. His room was darker than mine, but not colder. There was music playing, a haunting piano melody, delicate as falling ash. I sat on the edge of a leather chair. He leaned against the window, arms crossed. The rain helped, he murmured. It always does. Why? Because it drowns out the noise. What noise? The kind no one else hears. We didn't talk much more. But I stayed. And he didn't ask me to leave. That night we didn't touch. We didn't kiss. We just existed in the same quiet, sharing a silence that no longer felt like punishment. For a moment it felt like peace. But only a moment. Because the next morning Adrian was gone. No note. No explanation. Only a locked door and a staff member saying he'd traveled for business. He disappeared, just as something between us had begun to appear. If you're still with me, have you ever let your guard down and wondered if it meant anything? Let me know in the comments. You never know who felt the same way. Sign up now. This is the calm before the storm. And what comes next could shatter the silence forever. He was gone for 3 days. 3 days of silence. 3 days of unanswered questions. 3 days of pacing through a house that felt too big for one heartbeat. I tried not to think too much. I tried to read, to write, to walk. But my thoughts always circled back to him. And that look he gave me before he vanished. That moment we shared. That fragile thread we had just begun to spin between us. Was it real for him? Or just convenience? On the 4th morning I heard the front door open. My breath caught. I ran to the stairs, not to greet him but to see. To know. To feel something other than doubt. Adrian stood in the grand entrance, tall, immaculate, cold as ever. But he wasn't alone. Next to him was a woman, elegant, poised, devastatingly beautiful. She wore red. The color of warning. The color of heartbreak. Her hand rested casually on his arm like it had been there before. Like it belonged there. And when she looked up and saw me, she smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. But like a woman who knew she didn't have to fight to win. You must be Aurora, she said, voice sweet as poison. I've heard so much. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because Adrian didn't speak. He didn't explain. He didn't defend. He didn't even introduce her. And that silence hurt more than any scream ever could. Later that day I asked the housekeeper who she was. Her name was Isabel. An old friend. A former flame. A ghost from his past that clearly hadn't stayed buried. They dined together that night. Not in the main hall, but in the private salon. The same place he once poured me coffee in silence. Now filled with the sound of laughter, hers. I watched from the balcony above. Like a forgotten ornament in a house that wasn't mine. And yet, I couldn't stop staring at his face. He smiled. Not the cold smirk I knew. But something softer, familiar. Almost real. And that shattered something inside me. What do you do when someone you're just starting to care about shows they're still attached to someone else? That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling until dawn broke through the curtains, golden and cruel. He married me without love. And now I knew, part of him still belonged to someone else. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't there to lose. Isabel's laughter echoed through the mansion like perfume you can't wash off. Soft, sweet. Every corner I passed felt like it belonged to her. And yet, it was I who wore the ring. Not her. Not anymore. For 2 days she acted as though I didn't exist. She glided through the halls, whispered things to Adrian over wine, and smiled with the confidence of a woman who had history on her side. But history isn't the same as now. And I was his now whether he liked it or not. On the third morning I found her in the sunroom, casually flipping through one of my books. "You've made yourself quite at home," I said, my voice even but lined with steel. She looked up unfazed. "Adrian always told me this place needed a woman's touch," she smiled. "I'm just helping him remember." I stepped forward slowly. "Funny," I replied. "Because the last time I checked, the woman in this house wasn't you." There was a pause. A flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise. Admiration. Challenge. She stood too close. "Tell me, Aurora," she purred. "Do you really think he brought me here by accident?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't have to. I turned and left, but not before whispering, "We both know men don't invite ghosts unless they're ready to bury them." That afternoon I found Adrian in the library. He didn't look up as I entered, but I felt the tension in his shoulders. "I didn't know she'd stay this long," he said before I even opened my mouth. "But you invited her." He nodded once. "She was part of my life. Before." "And what am I, Adrian?" I asked. "An afterthought? A placeholder? A name you needed on a marriage certificate?" He stood then. Walked to the window. Didn't look at me, but I saw his fists clench. "You're not what I expected." His voice was low. Torn. "You were supposed to be silent. Simple. Safe." I laughed. Bitter, soft, beautiful. "And instead, you're loud even in your silence." He turned to face me. And for the first time I saw conflict. Not distance. Not disdain. But a man fighting something inside himself. Something he was afraid to name. "Isabel is your past, Adrian," I said. "But I'm the one waking up in your present." He didn't answer. And yet he didn't deny it. That night she left. No goodbyes. No scene. Just a car in the driveway and the scent of her perfume lingering like a warning. I watched from the top of the stairs as Adrian stood by the door, unmoving. When he turned around he saw me there. And this time he didn't look away. She may have known the boy he once was. But I was discovering the man he would become. He married me without love. But the moment her car disappeared down that street he looked at me as if he wasn't so sure anymore. Have you ever had to stand your ground? When the ghost of someone else tried to take your place? Tell me in the comments. Your courage might inspire someone still silent. After Isabel left, the silence in the mansion shifted. It wasn't sharp anymore. It didn't cut. It hovered, hesitant, unfinished, like a breath held too long. Adrian didn't speak of her. He didn't mention the reason behind her visit. But something in his eyes had changed. They weren't as distant now, just tired. Tired of carrying ghosts, tired of pretending not to feel. But I was tired too. Tired of being quiet. Tired of being polite. Tired of existing on the edge of someone else's story. So that morning I packed a bag. He found me in the hallway, keys in hand, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. "Where are you going?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was surprised. Unsteady. "Somewhere I can breathe," I said. "Somewhere I don't feel like a piece of furniture." He stepped closer, but I didn't move. "You don't have to leave." And you don't have to shut me out. Yet here we are. Things are complicated. No, Adrian, I whispered. Things are simple. You either let me in, or you lose me. There was silence. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything he couldn't say. Full of everything I no longer needed him to. He took a breath, deep, reluctant, real. Stay. Just that. One word. But not a command. Not an order. A request. And that changed everything. Why? I asked. Because it's easier than being alone? Because I fill the quiet. We were having tea in the garden when I asked him, "Why did you marry me, Adrian?" The real reason. He didn't look away this time. Because I thought it would solve everything. The inheritance. The family name. The silence in my chest. And did it? I asked. He smiled, bitter and beautiful. No. But maybe, it gave me a chance to find something better than silence. He looked at me, then really looked. Someone better. He asked me to stay, but I stayed for myself. He married me without love. But maybe, just maybe, he's starting to wonder if love is still possible. Have you ever stayed, not for them but for your own strength? Share your truth in the comments. This space is for those who survived the silence. And if you're still here, subscribe. Because what comes next isn't just about love. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. He hesitated. Because when I came home, and you weren't there, the house felt like a grave. I closed my eyes. That was the closest thing to a confession I'd heard from him. Not romantic. Not poetic. But honest. I didn't leave that day. Not because I forgave him. Not because I believed in happy endings. But because part of me still believed in beginnings. The days that followed were different. Not warm. Not easy. But different. He started joining me for breakfast. Asked about my favorite books. Told me once that I laugh like someone who used to know joy. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was a door, cracked open finally. We were having tea in the garden when I asked him, "Why did you marry me, Adrian?" The real reason. He didn't look away this time. Because I thought it would solve everything. The inheritance. The family name. The silence in my chest. And did it? I asked. He smiled, bitter and beautiful. No. But maybe, it gave me a chance to find something better than silence. He looked at me, then really looked. Someone better. He asked me to stay, but I stayed for myself. He married me without love. But maybe, just maybe, he's starting to wonder if love is still possible. Have you ever stayed, not for them but for your own strength? Share your truth in the comments. This space is for those who survived the silence. And if you're still here, subscribe. Because what comes next isn't just about love. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. It started with a whisper. A quiet phone call in the middle of the night. I woke up alone in bed, the sheets still warm from where his body had been. I followed the faint sound of his voice down the corridor. He was in the study, door closed, lights low. But the walls of that mansion, they were too old to hold secrets. No. She doesn't know yet. Because if she finds out, it's over. No one can ever know what really happened to Margaret. The name hit me like cold water. Margaret. I didn't know who she was. But I knew, in the way a woman feels, that whoever she had been, she was part of what broke him. And whatever happened to her was still breaking him now. He hung up. When I returned to bed, I pretended to be asleep. But my mind was wide awake, spinning stories in the dark. Who was Margaret? What had happened to her? And why was her name spoken like a curse? The next morning I asked, "Who's Margaret, Adrian?" He froze. A beat. Then another. "No one you need to worry about." I smiled, softly, bitterly. "Funny. Because your voice last night made her sound like everything I should worry about." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She was my fiancée." The room went quiet. "Before me?" I asked. "Before everything." He sat down. And for the first time since our wedding, Adrian Wolf told me a story not about business. Not about obligation. But about pain. Margaret was the woman he loved. Smart. Passionate. Reckless. She wanted to run away from the world, and he almost followed. But she died. Tragically. Unexpectedly. And according to him, because of him. "I was supposed to protect her," he whispered. "But I hesitated. I made the wrong call. And she paid the price." He looked at me then, eyes raw, unguarded. I swore I'd never love again. Never let anyone get close enough to be hurt by my silence. I didn't speak. Not right away. Because for the first time I saw the man behind the mask completely unarmed. And I was torn between wanting to comfort him and wanting to run from a heart still tied to a grave. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of anger, but because of truth. A truth that tasted like ashes. A truth that hurt not because he had loved someone else, but because he had loved fully once. And never believed he'd survive doing it again. No. I was the one trying to prove he still could. He tried to protect me by hiding the truth. But the truth was never what broke us. What broke us was his fear of feeling again. Have you ever known someone who punished themselves for something they couldn't forgive? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the strongest hearts are the ones still healing. And if you're still with me, subscribe now. The next chapter brings a storm. And not everyone survives the first lightning bolt. He married me without love. But I taught his heart to beat again. I told myself I wouldn't fall in love. Not with a man who couldn't say my name without clenching his jaw. Not with a man who lived with ghosts and kissed only shadows. But love doesn't ask permission. It sneaks in. Soft. Silent. Dangerous. And suddenly I wasn't just a woman in a cold marriage. I was a woman fighting to stay afloat in waters deeper than she ever planned to swim. After Adrian confessed about Margaret, something shifted again. He grew colder. Quieter. Polite. But distant. The nights felt longer. The mansion felt emptier. And I felt more alone in his presence than I ever did in his absence. "We're not real, Aurora," he said one night at dinner, barely meeting my eyes. "We're convenient. That's all this ever was." But his voice trembled. And his hands wouldn't stop shaking. So I asked the question I'd been avoiding for days. "Then why do you keep looking at me like you wish it were more?" He didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. I stopped trying. Stopped leaving him notes. Stopped waiting in the library. Stopped pretending we were anything but two strangers forced to share a surname. Inside, I couldn't stop feeling. Every time he passed me in the hallway and didn't look, I ached. Every time he poured himself a drink and didn't pour one for me, I broke a little more. And yet I still loved him. Because even when he hurt me, I could see the man he was trying so hard to bury. One evening I went to the beach, alone. The wind was wild, the sky heavy, and the ocean gray like his eyes. I screamed into the waves, letting the salt burn my throat. Not because I wanted him to hear, but because I wanted me to hear myself again. To remember the sound of my own voice. To remember I was more than his silence. More than his guilt. More than the placeholder he never asked for, but still needed. When I returned, he was waiting by the stairs. His eyes, red. His jaw, clenched. "You shouldn't disappear like that," he said. "You disappear every day," I replied. "Pause. That's different." "No, Adrian. It's exactly the same." And then I said it. The thing I never meant to say. The thing that slipped from the part of me that still believed in him. "I love you." The words dropped between us like broken glass. He froze. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't say that." "Why?" I asked, tears threatening. "Because you can't say it back? Because I don't deserve it." He turned away. And I watched him walk back into the shadows he called safety. Leaving me in the light, holding nothing but my own heart. He pushed me away, but I couldn't stop loving him. Not because he was perfect, but because I saw the parts of him no one else stayed long enough to witness. The morning after I told him I loved him, the mansion felt colder than it ever had. And this time, it wasn't just emotional. The windows were fogged, the air thick with something unsaid. I hadn't seen Adrian all night. And I told myself I wouldn't go looking. But love is foolish like that. It makes you wait at closed doors. It makes you hope even after the silence becomes a scream. I found him in the library. The same place where we once stood in the rain. Where he once flinched at a photograph. Where I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was room in his heart for me. But today he was packing. Books. Letters. Memories. "Are you leaving?" I asked, my voice barely above a breath. He didn't look at me. "No. You are." The words shattered me. I blinked, trying to understand. "What?" He finally turned. His eyes were tired, not angry, not cruel, just resigned. This marriage was supposed to be a solution. And instead, It's a mistake we're both trying to survive. My heart dropped. You're sending me away? I whispered. I'm setting you free. He walked toward me slowly like it hurt him more than he could admit. You deserve more than this. More than my grief. More than this house of ghosts. But I chose this, I said. I chose you. And that's exactly why I can't let you stay. He placed a set of keys in my hand. To the beach house. The one I'd only seen in photos. The one he used to escape the world. Go there, he said. Find peace. Away from me. And with that he turned his back. I left the next morning. No fight. No scream. Just the sound of a heart cracking beneath every step I took away from him. The beach house was beautiful. Quiet. And light. Everything the mansion wasn't. But no matter how many waves kissed the shore, I couldn't wash him off my skin. His silence still rang in my ears. His eyes still haunted my sleep. Then came the storm. 3 days into my exile, thunder rolled across the sea. I was lighting candles when the knock came at the door. Frantic, loud, desperate. I opened it, and there he was. Soaked. Bald-eyed. Breathless. You left, I said, stunned. No, he panted. You did. But I was wrong. What are you doing here? I told you to leave because I thought it was the only way to protect you. From me. From my damage. From the parts of me I can't fix. He stepped closer. But then I realized, the only peace I've ever felt is with you. I stood frozen. Everything I'd wanted, his words, his eyes, his vulnerability, it was all right there in front of me. But my heart didn't know whether to open again or shield itself from more scars. He told me to leave, but destiny had other plans. Plans written in storm winds. Plans that brought him back to the door he thought he'd closed forever. He stood in the doorway of the beach house, dripping wet, chest heaving, heart exposed. I love you, Aurora, he said. Not like a confession. Not like a grand gesture. But like a truth he could no longer contain. I wanted to believe it. But I also wanted to scream. Because love, when it comes too late, feels like a knife wrapped in roses. Why now? I asked, voice trembling. Why not before, when I begged you to see me? When I gave you everything and you gave me silence? His eyes shone with regret. Because I was still in the grave with her, he whispered. But when you left, it felt like dying all over again. And I realized, I'm not in love with my past anymore. I'm in love with you. The air cracked like lightning. I should have run into his arms. Should have forgiven him then and there. But love isn't that simple. Love, real love, demands more than words. We spent that night in silence, not the cold kind but the healing kind. And the next morning, for the first time, we woke up together, as husband and wife in truth. No barriers. No masks. Just two broken people choosing to stay. But peace is never permanent. 2 days later, Isabel returned. Unannounced. Uninvited. Unapologetic. She barged into the mansion like a hurricane, eyes blazing. You left me for her? She spat at Adrian. A woman you barely know? A stranger with a ring? She's not a stranger, he said calmly. She's my wife. Isabel's laughter was venom. You're making a mistake. I already made one, he said. When I thought you were my future. I stepped forward. He's not yours to claim anymore. She turned to me, sharp as glass. You think you've won, don't you? But you don't know him like I do. No, I said. I know him better. Because I've seen him broken. I've seen him heal. And I stayed when there was nothing left to win. She didn't speak again. Just turned on her heels, and disappeared. And with her exit, the last thread of his past unraveled. That night, Adrian held me like a man who finally understood what it meant to have something to lose. No more silence. No more ghosts. Only us. He finally chose me, but not without a fight. And I didn't love him because he was perfect. I loved him because he fought for me. For us. For the version of himself that only existed when I was near. Have you ever had to fight for someone's heart? Even when the world told you to give up? Leave your story in the comments. This is a space for love survivors. And if you're still with us, subscribe now. The last 2 chapters are coming. And what awaits us at the end isn't what you think. He promised me forever. But fate had one more test. He married me without love. But I taught his heart to beat again. It was the kind of day that smelled like beginnings. The sky was clear. The sea was calm. Adrian made breakfast, toast burned, coffee too strong, and I loved every imperfect second of it. He kissed my forehead, held me from behind while I read, laughed, truly laughed for the first time since I met him. I never thought forever could look like this, he whispered. And just like that, I believed it too. We made plans that day. Travel. Family. Renovating the beach house so it would always be ours. He said he wanted to learn how to cook. I told him I'd teach him how to dance. We laughed at how bad we both were at letting go, until now. That night he went to the city. Just for a few hours. Business. Something he said he had to wrap up for good. I'll be back by dinner, he smiled. Don't start the movie without me. But dinner came. And went. Then the phone rang. A hospital. An accident. His car a storm, a truck that ran a light. Time stopped. My hands shook as I drove. The world around me blurred as I repeated his name like a prayer, like a plea, like a promise. He was unconscious. Tubes. Machines. Silence. The doctor said he'd lost too much blood. Surgery was risky. There were no guarantees. Talk to him, the nurse whispered. They say love keeps them tethered. I sat by his side, held his hand, and told him the story of us. From the day we met, to the first time he looked at me like I mattered, to the moment I realized I didn't just love him, I belonged to him. Adrian, you promised me forever, I whispered. Don't break that promise now. Not when we finally made it out of the storm. I kissed his hand, rested my head on his chest, and I waited. 1 hour. Then a full night. No movement. No change. Until suddenly, his fingers twitched. Just once. Then again. His lips parted. And he whispered one word. Aurora. Tears poured from me like rain. He was coming back. Fighting his way back to me. To us. He promised me forever. And fate almost stole it. But love, our love, was louder than silence, stronger than death. Because when it's true love, nothing can keep us apart. He married me without love. But I taught his heart to beat again. The morning he opened his eyes, the world tilted back into place. Soft, slow, sacred. His fingers curled weakly around mine like a vow. His lips, cracked and dry, formed my name again, like a psalm whispered in the dark. Aurora. And I knew. Whatever we had survived wasn't luck. It was love. Messy. Imperfect. Unforgiving love. The kind that breaks you just to show you how strong your heart really is. He spent days recovering. Each step was fragile. Each breath a reminder of how close we came to losing everything. But we didn't. Because we chose us. Every day. Every moment. Not because it was easy. But because it was real. One afternoon, as the sun bled gold through the windows of the beach house, he looked at me and said, I didn't believe in second chances until you. I didn't believe in love, I said, until I had to fight for yours. We didn't need rings to remind us. We didn't need the world's approval. We just needed each other, and the silence we once feared. Because now the silence meant comfort. Not distance. Presence, not absence. Months passed. He danced with me in the kitchen even when there was no music. He burned breakfast every Sunday. And every morning he woke up and whispered, I still choose you. One rainy evening as thunder rolled across the horizon, I asked him what changed. What made you finally let me in? He paused thoughtful. It wasn't one moment, he said. It was all the small ones. The way you listened. The way you stayed. The way you didn't run when I was at my worst. You didn't love the mask. You loved the man underneath it. And he was right. I hadn't married a perfect man. I married a man in ruins. And piece by piece, we built each other again. We returned to the mansion one last time. It wasn't cold anymore. It didn't feel haunted. We opened the windows. Let the light in. Turned every locked room into something alive again. Together we transformed the place of silence into a home. One evening as we watched the fire crackle in the hearth, he turned to me with a velvet box in hand. I married you without love once, he said. Let me do it again, this time with every part of my soul. Tears blurred my vision. Yes, I whispered. 1,000 times yes. Because when it's true love, nothing can keep us apart. No fear. No ghosts. No destiny. We didn't fall in love. We grew up in this. Together. Have you ever found love when you least believed it was possible? Tell me in the comments. Your story might give someone the courage to hold on a little longer. If this journey touched your heart, sign up now. Share it with someone who still believes that even the coldest hearts can learn to love again. He married me without love, but I taught his heart to beat again. And in the end, it beats for me.